Well, what's coming up now?
So we want to bring on Ben Mcnally, UT LBJ school student, about to graduate, has earned turning with us and has done great work with us supporting this program. And love for you, Ben, for maybe to share a little bit about yourself first, and then if you would, then bring on your guests and introduce them.
Sure. Thank you very much, David. It's an honor to be here with you and with all of our panelists and guests here today. My name is Benjamin Mcnally. I'm a senior at University of Texas at Austin. I'm double majoring in history and international relations, and I have the honor of being involved in the America's Future series. And I want to thank David, Scott, and the rest of the team for all the work that they've done putting on these conferences in the last few weeks. Before I introduce our panel today, I would like to take time to recognize the very recent passing of an American hero, retired U.S. Air Force Major General Michael Collins. After serving as a fighter pilot and test pilot, General Collins was selected for the astronaut program in 1963. He flew as a pilot on Gemini 10 and then was chosen as the command module pilot for Apollo 11. On July 20th, 1969, he orbited the moon alone as the command module pilot, while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on another celestial body. After leaving the astronaut program, he became the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs and Director of the National Air and Space Museum. And as we take time to discuss the future of defense innovation and the future of America, we must take time to remember that we stand on the shoulders of giants like Michael Collins, Jackie Cochran, Neil Armstrong, and other courageous aviators who, time and time again, slipped the surly bonds of Earth on behalf of a brighter future for us all. It is in the spirit of these aviators that we gather here today to discuss how combat aviation is leveraging emerging technology to accelerate change. For the last 2 decades, American and NATO combat aviators have been deploying to combat operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other locations throughout the Middle East. With a focus on supporting troops on the ground, these aviators deploying to the Middle East have been focused on missions and environments where American air power is all but uncontested. These sustained deployments, combined with budget sequestration that began in 2013, have worn through much of the capital stock that the aviation community depends on to perform its mission. Sustained deployment cycles have also stressed our pilots and their families. Sequestration was followed by a sustained period of shortfalls in flight hours and maintenance capabilities, resulting in increased fatalities in U.S. military aviation, particularly in the Marine Corps. This has led many pilots to either leave service entirely or continue serving in the Reserves or Air National Guard, leading to shortages of experienced pilots on active duty. During this time, the United States has begun to contend with renewed Russian aggression in Eastern Europe and Syria, as well as the growing threat posed by China. As this new era of great power competition is beginning, combat aviation is undergoing some significant changes. First, an aging fleet of 4th-generation aircraft is being replaced with 5th-generation aircraft. 5th-generation aircraft combine low observable stealth technology, sensor fusion, medium-range air-to-air missiles, and unparalleled radar detection range into one aircraft, giving pilots an unmatched advantage over any aircraft fielded by a hostile nation. While these airplanes are exceptional in their capability, they're very expensive to operate, requiring increased maintenance hours and costing more per flight hour than their 4th-generation predecessors. Second, the military is outsourcing adversary training aircraft, also known as Red Air, to private companies. These companies are able to deliver cost-efficient solutions to the military for adversary training, but the capabilities of their aircraft are not adequate to simulate the threat of a Russian Su-57 or a Chinese J-20. Despite the private sector's Herculean efforts, the military is still not able to get enough Red Air assets to meet its training requirements. With depleted capital stock, an ongoing pilot shortage, a more perilous international environment, a lack of Red Air assets, and increasing costs per flight hour, US and NATO combat aviators must leverage every available capability to achieve maximum lethality on the battlefield. To address these issues, the military has been investing heavily in new dual-use technologies that are being acquired from the consumer market and repurposed for military applications. Technologies including virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and machine learning are helping to train and qualify our aviators to meet readiness requirements. These technologies are part of a growing ecosystem of pilot training methods that is summarized as live, virtual, and constructive training, also known as LVC. Today's panel is being moderated by retired Navy Commander Vincent Aiello, call sign Jello. He spent 25 years flying the F-A-18 Hornet, the F-A-18 Super Hornet, and the F-16 Fighting Falcon. He's a former Top Gun instructor, holds an undergraduate degree in mathematics from UCLA, and a master's of business administration from Colorado State University in Fort Collins. He's currently an airline pilot and the founder and host of the Fighter Pilot podcast, which explores the fascinating world of air combat, the aircraft, the weapon systems, and most importantly, the people. Jello, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. That's quite an introduction. I appreciate it. And just to make sure, can you hear me okay?
Received.
Okay, fantastic. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. And I am going to be outshadowed by the fantastic panelists we have joining us. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion over the next hour. I'd like to spend just a couple moments, if I could, introducing each of the panelists. And when I finish, if the panelists could please say a quick hello, then that would help to make sure you're here and to acknowledge the introduction. I'll start with U.S. Air Force Colonel Tucker Hamilton, call sign Cinco. He is the director of the Department of the Air Force and MIT Artificial Intelligence Accelerator, which is helping solve Air Force and Space Force problems using AI in partnership with MIT. Cinco is also a fighter pilot and test pilot by trade, most recently commanding F-35 development at Edwards Air Force Base in California. He holds undergraduate and master's degrees in aerospace engineering from the University of Colorado and University of Tennessee. He also holds a master's degree in flight test engineering from the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School. Hello, Cinco, and welcome.
Hey, Jello. Hi, everyone else. Great to be here.
Fantastic. And Cinco was a guest recently on the Fighter Pilot podcast, a couple times actually, so appreciate that. And so we do have some rapport. Next up with him there at MIT is U.S. Air Force Captain Kyle McAlphin, call sign Gouge. Gouge is the AI Research Flight Commander at the Department of the Air Force MIT AI Accelerator in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is a current C-17 Globemaster III pilot. Gouge instructed undergraduate pilots in the T-6 Texan II at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma, where he co-founded the Vance Air Force Base Spark Cell that pioneered virtual reality training methods, technology integration, and syllabus modernization for Air Force pilot training. He earned a bachelor's degree in computer engineering from the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs and maintains a certified information systems security professional credential. Easy for me to say, probably not so easy to get. Welcome, Gouge.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Fantastic, and it's good to meet you. All right, next up, I hope he's here. I wasn't confirmed of this before, but Daniel Robinson, call sign Bond, is the founder and chief executive officer of Red 6, a company revolutionizing augmented reality for military training applications worldwide, including live virtual constructive paradigms. Bond is a former Royal Air Force Tornado F-3 pilot, and he was the youngest fighter pilot of his generation to attend the prestigious weapons instructor course, the UK equivalent to the US Air Force Weapons School and the Navy's Top Gun. He's also the first non-American pilot to fly the F-22 Raptor, including as an instructor pilot. And Bond is a graduate of the Royal Air Force College, Cranwell. How you doing, Bond? Okay, moving on. Lastly, but not leastly, is Ty Bachmann, call sign OD, who is currently the director of flight test for Collins Aerospace, a retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel. OD has flown over 40 different types of airplanes as a test pilot. He was the first Marine to fly the developmental versions of the F-35A, which is the Air Force version, and the F-35B, which the Marine Corps does have some of. And he later commanded an F-35 squadron. OD holds an undergraduate degree in engineering from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Hello, OD.
Hey, Joe, thanks, and happy to be here.
Fantastic. Glad to have you. All right, so with this, what I'd like to do very quickly is just kind of talk about where we are now before we jump into where we are going. And so, Cinco, if you don't mind, I'll lean on you here, and I can add a little bit from the Navy's perspective as well. But tell us, based on your career and all the different flying you've done, when it comes to training, what are some of the current limitations that we have? And again, we're not necessarily thinking about the cutting edge threats and everything that's coming, but just over your career, what have been some of the limitations you've had to deal with? And I'm thinking just off the top of my head, the size of airspace or the number of adversaries or the availability of threats that replicate the real threat in training. But what are some limitations that we have existing?
Yeah, I mean, Jello, you hit on the primary ones, right? Like we have a hard time of really emulating a combat environment. Now we've been able to get around that through different flags. So people may be familiar with something called Red Flag or Northern Edge, which is held up in Alaska. And these are the big, large force exercises that are able to emulate some part of the execution of combat. So that means like the planning portion of it, the administrative flying portion of it, which is getting to the airspace, getting everyone refueled correctly, getting everyone on the right radio frequency, which sounds like it should be simple, but is actually extremely difficult. And then, being able to come home safely from those type of exercises and just to execute, with 100 aircraft in the airspace is what red flags are really about. But the actual feeling of being able to employ and see like this weapon actually did damage to this aircraft, right? Because when we're doing red flags or when we're training, we'll shoot at other aircraft. They're red air, we call them, the bad guys. And so the bad guys are just other people in our squadron that are pretending to be bad guys that day, and they get shot at. And then when they get killed in a scenario, they just turn and they exit the battle space, but they're still there, right? And so that's a limitation, just being able to actually fight what you see instead of like firing multiple missiles. I mean, how many people on this panel have killed someone like over and over and over again after, unloading 8 missiles on a person that was already killed prior, right? So that is definitely a limitation that I think is worth highlighting here.
Certainly. And the Navy equivalent of that, instead of a red flag, is we'll have, say, Air Wing Fallon training in Fallon, Nevada, east of Reno. And you're absolutely right. You have the artificialities of training, but also the cost limits. I mean, of course, we can't afford to shoot down even drones, but obviously real aircraft with people in them, clearly, or even fire missiles. And you have all those limitations. As well, in my airline capacity, I have flown all around both the Nellis range and the Fallon ranges. And I can tell you that airliners don't like to have to fly too far out of their way, or the logistics companies, because they're trying to get people and parcels to their destinations. And so as the threat continues to expand and the capabilities of the threat continue to expand, sure, we would love to have larger airspace, but over the continental United States, that gets very difficult because then you have the airliners that are competing to get where they're trying to go. In addition to that, you have so many demands on the airspace. So in Fallon, we have the air wing training for squadrons before they deploy on an aircraft carrier, but you also have Top Gun and then the other community Top Gun equivalents for example, the EA-18G Growler. And then you have the advanced readiness programs that are part of the workups. So there is a great demand on the training ranges. There's a demand on the assets. Getting realistic assets are all part of that. So Odie, I'd like to go to you next. As we think about these limitations, and really as the threat continues to improve in scope and capability and lethality, but also that long range, there are some different methods we can use to do that. One of them is the live virtual construct that Ben mentioned. And you and I had a bonus episode, didn't we, on some technology that Collins is fielding. Can you give us a quick summary of that?
Yeah, definitely, Jello. Yeah, that was a fun episode. I appreciate that. For this quorum we have here today, though, more specifically, and I'll kind of add on to what Cinco said. And the threat is definitely driving this, but airspace is a definite factor. And frankly, whether it's Delta and Jello flying his Delta Airlines airplane all around the knitter to get to Vegas via the long route. Frankly, the airspace around Vegas isn't even big enough today, based on the threats and the airplane capabilities we have. So that introduces a cool new technology to the world, which is, hey, there's no reason why we can't cordon off the airspace that the good guys are flying in. But the bad guys, they're not real airplanes. They're synthetically generated, and they can be hundreds and hundreds of miles away and be giving the good guys a picture, or the blue air a picture of what the bad guys are really gonna do. And it's a fantastic capability that's on the cutting edge right now, especially for Collins Aerospace. Does that answer your question, Jello?
I knew I'd do that at least once, and I'm sure I'll do it again. Absolutely. I was hoping to have an opportunity to talk about your ticks too. We could either go into that now, or we can come back to it. But yeah, there are, I would say, innovative solutions to the training challenges that we face that the live virtual construct paradigm really brings, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take that bait. Hey, so TICS2 is a grand program that literally yesterday just achieved milestone C. So for the people on this call who understand what milestone C is, that's a big deal for the fighters in this world, because soon we're reaching full rate production here quickly, and that's going to bring an LVC capability to the warfighter at a faster rate. So excited about TICS2 and where it's going, and thankful to have you brought that up. Thanks, Jello, for helping me out.
Yeah, sure thing. All right. And so it looks like we're trying to get Bond here. He's probably very close, but in the meantime, Gouge, I wanted to go to you because I'm not familiar with the Spark Cell, but I know obviously Air Force training as well as Navy and Marine Corps training can really benefit from some of these innovative solutions coming along, like augmented reality. Can you give us a quick example, or I should say a quick summary of what the problem was that you saw and the solution that you suggested, and how's it doing now?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so big picture, the Air Force has been interested in upscaling pilot training for several years now. They started doing that with Pilot Training Next actually started in Austin, Texas, but now it's at Joint Base San Antonio. And one of their first mandates was filling out what I call the fidelity gap in simulators. So on the one hand, you have the very expensive monolithic legacy simulators that are perfect reproductions of the cockpit in just about every way. In a lot of cases, those are tens of millions of dollars. On the other hand, you have the 2% fidelity, like a printout of the cockpit, paper printout of the cockpit you paste to your wall that we all used to practice switchology on. And obviously not very expensive. But in between the 2% fidelity and the 100% fidelity, we have nothing. There's just really not much there. And so Pilot Training Next charge was to fill out that fidelity gap with some of these new technologies that are just now enabling us to get at those problems. And so VR was the big obvious one. And so one thing that they've done pretty well is take VR and virtual reality and more recently sort of mixed reality and XR and all the other realities and implement those into pilot training. So they're kind of like a technology integration detachment, and they've since spun out. So a very small unit of just a few students, they've since spun out what they call pilot training transformation or pilot training 2.5, which is an attempt to get that out across the force. So all the things they learned in the first few versions of Pilot Training Next, they're attempting to get those out into the broader pipeline, which is in and of itself quite a large challenge. So,
sure. Are we starting to see any of the benefits of this? Are there students that have been through the process, and is there any measurable improvement either in their score or their situational awareness?
Yeah, so Pilot Training Next will tell you, and I totally agree with this, that they have been able to make it more efficient. And so there's a couple things you can do with that. Well, really two things you can do with that. If you're able to train people faster, you can either use that to actually train them faster and just graduate them sooner, or you can use that to spend the same amount of time in pilot training. So typical in the Air Force, 1 year pipeline, you can go all the way to the end of that 1 year and make them better than they would have been before. And so that's sort of like a leadership strategy question, what you want to do with those efficiency gains. But I think it's pretty clear they've demonstrated some pretty great improvements in efficiency. The first class they were able to graduate in 6 months as opposed to 1 year. We'll see if that's able to be exported to the entire force. Like I said, that's a big challenge in and of itself, but those are some of the initial results.
Okay. All right, Bond, we're going to give you a chance here. Apologies for the mix up on our end, but let's see. Are you with us now? I think you're still muted, but.
How's that, Jello? Did we make it work?
Oh, fantastic. It's good to see you again. You missed my glowing introduction of you.
I missed everything. You're going to have to catch me up here. What are we talking about?
Well, we were just saying how great a guy you are and how really we're all here for you. But no, we just got started and we're glad to have you. We're talking about, of course, the future of training on America's Future series and some of the challenges that we have. We've already talked briefly about existing challenges and then some of the technology that's coming. And then Gouge gouged us up on how it's going, even in the flight school levels, if you will, for some of this technology. And my plan was to talk about the live virtual construct element of the training, and then segue to you, because when you're doing the LVC, it's all fine and good when you're mostly looking at a radar display or some other display inside. But when you get to the merge, then all that's done. And in real life, we need to look outside and make decisions. And that's where Red 6 comes in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've been and actually flown and seen the technology firsthand, so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. But yeah, you're absolutely right, and that was that pain point was basically which was the founding sort of pain point for Red 6, and that was the genesis of why we came to being. Because LVC, in my view, is undoubtedly the way of the future. It has to be because of all the reasons we've outlined. You know, there's a chronic demand, there's a massive demand signal and a chronic undersupply of adversary training. And so we founded Red 6 to, in essence, complete the full LVC ecosystem such that, you know, we go from that beyond visual range to within visual range transition. And the training stops at that point with the classic LVC, you know, offerings that are out there right now. And we really wanted to complete that jigsaw. And so with Red 6, we needed to figure out some fundamental problems. And that was ultimately, how do we make augmented reality work outdoors and in the most dynamic environments? And that's been a technically extremely challenging thing to accomplish. It's one of the reasons that augmented reality as an industry has perhaps languished, because it's been fundamentally an indoor solution only. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been working on solving that problem, which we're making tremendous progress. I know you saw the last version of the technology. It has come on leaps and bounds since the last time you saw it, to the point now where we have something that is really, really compelling. And the vision for this is, whilst we offer the ability to do within visual range training in itself as a standalone sort of value proposition, what we hope to do is connect the technology into the incumbent LVC players in the space, because there are a number of providers that make up the overall solution, and we are certainly one of them. But now, regardless of which system you choose, that point where you transition from the beyond visual range to the within visual range, we can look outside of the cockpit and no kidding, there's an entity there that to fight. And the obvious question, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is, okay, well, how do you, whilst we perceive that entity is out there, and, you know, for us, whatever it may be, we can code. So if you want to train against a Su-57 or a J-20, that's now possible. But you start doing some interesting things like layering in the artificial intelligence, which now controls the behavior of that airplane. Then now all of a sudden you've got an extremely incredible value proposition, because we can get to the merge, and those entities at the merge will think and fly and fight and make decisions as if they were piloted by real airplanes. So if we have the intel on the platforms and we understand the flight physics, it's simply, again, code. Case in point now, since you last saw us, we're now flying a real airplane against an AR Bandit J-20 controlled by artificial intelligence. And so we look out of the window and we're flying against something that doesn't exist, that's thinking for itself and flying and fighting and making real BFM decisions for itself. And I can tell you it's a challenge. And we've been leveraging some of the great work that the companies have been doing in the Alpha Dogfight trials with DARPA to inform the behavior of that bandit. And we've got something now that's really exciting. And we are every day now flying against J-20s that are thinking and flying and fighting against us. And that's something that's incredibly exciting, because it completes the overall LVC ecosystem. But then when we start looking at, you know, some of the problems of how we actually train pilots from start to finish, there are a tremendous amount of value propositions that this technology can fill. So for example, at AETC, some of the problem sets that pilots get to look at and are challenged by that require multiple airplanes, now you don't necessarily need them. You can use AR to replace those airplanes and the need for pilots and fuel and supply chains. So we're offering a really compelling value proposition that produces pilots to a higher standard much quicker, with dramatic reductions in cost. And I think that's some of the beauty of what AR has to offer.
And I'm already seeing a theme here today in our discussion, which is we have these relatively daunting potential adversaries to face that are gaining in capability. And yet we have this technology and these capabilities that are coming in that are making the fidelity better. It's increasing our efficiencies. It's costing less. So there's a lot of value there. And at this point, I will open up to if anyone either wants to ask another panelist a question or respond to anything that someone else has said. And if not, I'll just keep going, but feel free to jump in and interject. But yeah, Cinco, I wanted to go to you anyway, because I don't, other than knowing how to spell AI, this is not my world, and it's an amazing technology. And I wonder if you could elaborate on the AI portion as well as the machine portion, but please feel free to respond prior to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with saying that I also think that our platforms and our data link is getting so robust that we're able to be more effective on the battlefield, and we're able to adopt in some of these new technologies more easily. So I started flying the F-15C, and data link was just like brand new. Not many people were used to using it. And fast forward now, the F-35 has such a high fidelity data link, and the platform itself is really absorbing so much information on the battlefield that you're able to have very accurate information of everything that's going on around you, which kind of changes the way that we approach the battle space, right? What was me in my simulator in the F-15C, trying to emulate combat scenario was very difficult because I could never really get the feel for looking outside and the cross-check that was required as a fighter pilot to look outside all the time. Well, the F-35, you don't need to look outside as much because you don't fly in the same formations, because the technology is supporting you in a fashion that no platform has really been able to well, the Raptor definitely was able to do that, but before 5th gen, there were some limits on it. So just to comment on that, and regarding artificial intelligence, I mean, the technology is clearly going to be a part of it. It already is for the most part, but a part of everything that we do. It's going to be ubiquitous. We're going to have to understand how to develop it. We have to understand data. Like AI is this word, and everyone really loves to think about it, but really what makes AI possible is like the software, the data underneath it. And that type of infrastructure is what we need to really develop so that we're able to go after and use AI algorithms. So it's not just about having what Bond mentioned as like an enemy airframe that is powered by AI, but like we need to think back too and say like, what are our sensors? What data are they collecting? How are they collecting it? How are we cleaning and structuring that data? How are we labeling that data? How is that data going to interact with these different systems, right? So that is a hugely important piece of our future with regard to using artificial intelligence as a society.
Jello, if I can pick up on that and just piggyback off what Cinco was saying, he's quite right. I 100% agree with the thesis on data and AI and the utilization of. The question becomes to the point. Certainly, I experienced it in the F-22, and I'm sure Cinco, same thing with the F-35. There is so much data coming into the cockpit. Is what do you do with that data? And when you've got multiple assets out there producing data streams that are coming in, the first question is how do you fuse it in and put it into a common picture that makes sense to everyone? And as that data stream or those data streams become more and more prevalent and more information comes in, we need to think about how we interact with that data. And I think the combination of AI with data and then AR in conjunction with that offers a really compelling way to start thinking about how we visualize that data in the three-dimensional battle space. So even as good as the displays are on F-22 and F-35, we still are heads down looking at these screens down in front of us. Well, what if we could do, what if, the age-old adage of a picture paints 1,000 words, what if we can bring the eyes up and out of the cockpit? And now we start really fundamentally redefining how we interact and visualize that data in three-dimensional space. I think that's also an incredibly compelling value proposition for some of the ways that we're not necessarily thinking about using augmented reality. And I would argue that augmented reality in conjunction with AI and data is a critically important part of the future of ABMS, for example, and JADC2, because we really need to think about how we make that picture as simple as possible for the operators, such that we can make decisions quicker, such that we can sit inside an enemy's OODA loop.
I'd like to pivot on this topic just a little bit, and Odie, I'll go to you here as the senior member as far as from when you first came into the service. I feel like the paradigm of being a fighter pilot, and I realize maybe Aviate hopefully qualifies in that field, but what I'm getting at is I feel like the people that are coming in are changing. And Gouge, maybe you can help me with this too, because if you look back at some of the even just the Hollywood portrayals of the Great Santini or even Top Gun from 1986, but what it means to be a fighter pilot is changing. I'm not being very articulate here, and it used to be a lot more about just bare grunting and bravado and getting to the merge and then pulling a bunch of G's and fighting. And I feel like now with all this technology and all this this data that we have to process, that what it means to fly a high performance fighter is changing. Odie, compared to when you first came in and the young people you see now, like Gouge and the folks that he's training, do you think that's a fair hypothesis? Is the demographic of a fighter pilot changing, is what I'm trying to ask you?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I guess that's a compliment that I'm the senior, maybe the senior member here. So I'll take that as wisdom. But yeah, no kidding, it's changing. And all I could think of while you were talking was all the things I learned from my kids and how they learn. And I don't know, when you guys went through school, I was the guy who had one book open here and a hand to remember a page, and another book open here and a hand to remember a page, and I'd go back and forth. And I still learn like that today. You know, preface that with the kids who are coming out of college, like my son, going into flight school, who are spending most of the time scrolling through an app on their phone and digesting just voluminous amounts of information and getting it instantly. And they don't need a book or a printout or anything. And the ability then to get this volume amount of information to these kids or to these young fighter pilots is actually increased. We actually found that. And Cinco backed me up on this. When we started with F-35, and F-35 is a training system that was based on paperless. And guys like me absolutely struggled with the paperless idea. And now it's absolutely starting to boom, paperless, paperless, paperless. And probably just like you and your Delta Airlines, you're not carrying out a bag full of pubs anymore, right? So you got it on a pad and you have all the information really quickly to you. That amount, like, think about the volumes of information you have right in front of you that you can get to it. And the amount that you can digest. These kids are good at it, and we have to keep up with them for sure. So I'll turn it over to somebody else in the panel to make up for what this old guy said.
Well, I was trying to be delicate. I should have called you the Silver Eagle. That's, I think, a compliment. But Gouge, let me go to you. I mean, I would put you in that generation from what I can tell, but also just with your experience at Vance, are the young people coming in? I mean, what are they like? Is it the risk of stereotyping? I feel like in the old days, it used to be the high school jock, right? And I wonder if now it's more the chess player or the serious thinker.
That's a great question. I think from my point of view, the kids have always been, one of the best part about teaching pilot training is the people. The students are so motivated. You don't have any of the problems with attitude or lack of motivation or anything like that. The best part about teaching pilot training is absolutely the people. I'm not sure that I noticed so much like the generational cultural differences, but I absolutely, the thing that worried me a lot was that we were training to the previous war. And so I think during Squadron Officer School a couple of years ago, I visited the Tuskegee Airmen Memorial. And they had a copy of the syllabus from, I think it was the 1950s, maybe 1960s. And I recognized the syllabus. It was almost the exact same syllabus in broad strokes that we use today. And it really blew my mind. I mean, I thought about that for a long time. And how is it that we are teaching the same skills, even though, for example, the war has gotten much more complex. Now flying is much more complex than it was previously with missiles and technology and GPS and navigational position warfare and all sorts of new things that we have to be good at. How is it that we're teaching the exact same things in the exact same way? So this is one of the things we started to think about. And that was really what interested me, is how do we teach exactly like you're talking about, the higher level skills, the higher cognition that humans are going to be so necessary for in the future. And that's actually UPT 2.5, so the pilot training 2.5 that we're trying to expand all these lessons learned out to the force through, is focusing a lot more on these decision-making kind of higher level cognition things instead of, or I should say in addition to the stick and rudder skills.
Jello, do you mind if I jump in real quick and add? So one thing I'll mention that Gouge is working on for the AI accelerator is he's trying to figure out how to recognize when a student pilot is kind of task saturated, right? And then to give that information to the instructor at that time and be like, hey, instructor, your pilot is looking at the wrong thing right now, kind of nudging the instructor. And I want to tie that thought into what Bond is doing, because Bond, what you said is fascinating. I'm a big fan of Red 6, and we've been friends for a while, but really exciting what you guys are doing. And when you talked about making a J-20, right, maneuver in relation to the Bandit using AI, what I'd love to see, and something we're working on, is how do we take AI then actually into your own cockpit and tell the pilot, like human machine teaming, tell the pilot, like, you should be doing this now with your rudder, or you should be doing this now with your lift vector. And do you see that type of marriage coming to fruition through some of the work you guys are doing?
Yeah, it's a great point, Cinco. And I know it's something you and I have discussed previously. I think by virtue of some of the technical challenges we've had to solve to be able to make augmented reality in dynamic environments a reality, we have a level of analysis and understanding of the pilot and what they are looking at very, very precisely, right? To be able to display and draw accurately. But the one ancillary benefit of that is because we have that fidelity of information to display information to the pilot, we are also able to extract a data set from the pilot, which is extremely accurate. And we can start to get into things like cognitive load, how saturated is the individual, be it a student, a combat pilot, at any given point in time, and take that data and do some interesting stuff with AI that is almost predictive in nature based on the performance of the pilot at the time. And then maybe the AI can start to step in and prompt or inform or encourage certain decisions that maybe, you know, the pilot is struggling to reach based on cognitive load. And I would actually go a step further than that, because one thing that really interests me is the utilization of that data set in the debrief, right? We all know that we can go up and we can go fly, but it's useless unless we're debriefing. And thankfully, gone are the days where he who shouts loudest in the debrief wins the debrief, right? We actually do a level of analysis now that is pretty compelling, but there is still a certain amount of subjectivity in terms of analyzing contributing factors and root cause. And the data sets that we're now able to extract, I think, are incredibly valuable. And the question is, what do we do with that data in the debrief? And it kind of parlays into something that Gouge was saying. And I'd like to sort of ask the question is, I think we need to be analyzing students more on a case-by-case basis. If we are struggling to get a percentage of students through to meet the supply gap of pilots, then can we think about things like tailored syllabus for an individual student based on performance and real analysis of performance, not just, hey, you've passed the ride, but hey, you've passed the ride and you've crushed it. We could probably bypass the next ride, or this little individual component of the ride you struggled with. And can we tailor a syllabus or the next ride to the individual needs of the student, thereby circumventing the need to go through a laborious syllabus at the same stage of everyone else? And I think that all comes down to the use of the extraction of data, the analysis of the data, and the use of that data in conjunction with AI in almost a predictive model, start thinking about what does the next ride look like for someone. So I'd like to push that across the Gouge in terms of what you guys are thinking, because this is becoming a reality really quickly.
Absolutely, and that's probably one of the most interesting benefits of things like VR and the technology that you're working on is maybe a simple way to think about it is just pupil tracking. If you can see where someone is looking at any given point in time, you really know what they were thinking, or maybe the closest proxy for what they were thinking that I can think of. And that's incredible, I think, for pilot training, and exactly like you're talking about for personalization, individualization of training. Those are the incredible things I think that enables probably the second big innovation that we're looking for, and it's kind of a dirty word these days. The second big innovation we're looking for in the pilot training next kind of sphere is individualization of pilot training. And some of the technologies, for example, like you're talking about, absolutely the pupil tracking, gaze tracking stuff, I think is an excellent proxy for cognitive processes, but also things just as simple as regular physiology. And I think what I've learned through working on this AI research project at MIT through the AI Accelerator is that a lot of these questions are unanswered. No one really knows yet what the best proxy is for cognitive state. How do you tell if someone's channelized in the cockpit or task saturated? There are some interesting first ideas, but no one really knows yet. And so I think that's a really important question that we really need to be getting at as a society and Air Force, Navy.
So in that case, and Cinco, I want to come back to something you said here. If I've got AI in the cockpit and it's saying, hey, you're not quite using enough rudder, or your lift vector is not quite in the right place, the logical question is, why am I there?
Well, I mean, I'll jump on that initially. You know, my thought, as people ask me all the time, like, oh, the F-35 is so great. Why do we need a pilot? Or what's the next fighter look like? Do you need a pilot? I think you do. I think you do for ethical reasons of pulling the trigger and pressing the pickle button, right? I think that like a UAV may be autonomous to a certain extent, but it is being controlled by an operator who is making that life and death decision. And so when you empower a fighter aircraft to make its own life and death decision, then I think we're going to have some major ethical considerations as a society to grapple with. Because I think right now you need that person in the cockpit to make that decision. Because, you know, if fighter aircraft moves at a certain speed, if you merge, you know, 2,000 miles away from where the operator is, that aircraft is probably going to have to make a decision if it needs to shoot down another aircraft, right? And so I don't think we're at that point yet to be able to have the confidence that those systems are, no kidding, going to make the right choice, especially when they're artificial intelligence, especially when there's deep learning and other things involved that may not be fully understood or explained by us right now. That's one of the challenges we have actually with AI algorithms, is we can get the response we want, but we don't always know what's kind of going on the inside of the algorithm. And so we need a transparent and explainable AI where we actually know why the computer is making the decisions that it's making.
I think that's a valid point. And then Gouge, I want to come back to you. And again, maybe this is starting to get into ethical discussions, but at what point then do we start seeking candidates for flight school who have certain capabilities? And what if those certain capabilities are more likely to come from urban environments or inner city environments or places where certain now genders might have an advantage or races have an advantage? I mean, is there a slippery slope to this? Or is it, hey, look, we have data that says this is the most effective for the military, so we're going to make an exception because these are the people we need to fight our wars? I'm guessing it's not going to be the latter, but where is that line if it's even been discussed yet?
Yeah, I think that's what Cinco is getting at with the AI ethics. From the AI ethics point of view, I think that's a really tough thing, but you have to do it. I mean, you have to think about what is the point of all this? What is the AI optimizing? And so, for example, the thought experiment you can use is if we train an AI, ask it what makes a good pilot and train it on all the historical data. Then it's going to tell you, like a white male between the ages of 20 and 24, and we know that's not what makes a good pilot. But that's if you just blindly trust an algorithm, then that's what you get from it. And you have to sort of question the algorithms and have tools and techniques to sort of tease out how it made decisions, which is really difficult and sort of the cutting edge of AI and machine learning. So as far as the question of how do we prioritize diversity, that's a tough one. I'm way above my pay grade.
Yeah, of course.
I tend to think that diversity is always super valuable, and you need, I think, if we want to win in the future, we need a diversity, a variety of viewpoints.
Jello, if I can just add to this as well. I mean, we can sit here and theorize and postulate a future of AI and unmanned cockpits, right? But I think the reality of it is the days of the manned cockpit are going to be around for some time yet. So I think the real question is, how do we utilize AR and AI and all of the cutting edge technologies to interact in a blended solution, right? I think that's the real question. So we talk about loyal wingman, and if the thesis is an F-35 pilot or an F-22 pilot enters a piece of airspace in conjunction with a number of unmanned entities, then how can we utilize the technology to interact with those entities in a seamless and efficient way? And that's from an operational context. But I think also there's an interesting discussion to be had about have we thought through how we would train with this stuff on a day-to-day basis? Would we really take all of these unmanned entities and put them up in the sky with an F-22 and F-35? I would suggest that the answer to that is no. So how can we use a combination of AR and AI to simulate those entities alongside an F-35 or an F-22 driver? And I think certainly for the next 10 to 20 years, those are the real discussions we should be focusing on. How do we envision a ConOps for a blend of manned and unmanned? I think the days of replacing the fighter pilot, to Cinco's point, are still a little way off.
And I receive that question quite frequently from young listeners to my podcast because they, like we, at some point in our lives, aspire to such a career and they wonder if it'll be around. So I think that's a valid point and a great segue in the time we have remaining. And Ben, just interrupt me at some point here if we want to take any questions or anything else. But I'd like to circle back to live virtual construct. And Odie, maybe I can lean on you here a little bit. When I think back to the training that probably, if I can speak for Cinco and Odie and you, or Bond, I meant to say, and you, Odie, everything we did was live, right? So you'd go out with, say, maybe 2 of you and 4 of your buddies who are playing Red Air that day, and you engage notional weapons. You have certain procedures that you do to say, okay, I think my shot is valid, so you in real life would be dead, so remove yourself, and there's the artificialities of that. But as we speak now of the live virtual constructive, the virtual and the constructive can be, I think, a little mystifying for people. So Odie, can you remind everyone just what that means as far as the practicalities of it? And then we can take from that into what that means for our future of training.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, we all know what the live is, and that's the F-35, F-22 drivers that we've been talking about. The virtual piece is tying bringing the guys that are sitting in the simulator. And I like the way Gouge talked about it, to that 100% to that 2%. We've got different types of simulators that we can bring into that fight that absolutely play a part as we grow in our training capabilities. And then the constructive side, that's a digital entity that is produced and shown to the pilot on its displays that is not actually real, which is a fantastic, again, capability based on our range constraints we deal with today. So that's the way I understand LVC. And like I said, I think we talked earlier when you led me into Text2 being able to do that for us, and I brought up Milestone C, but the ability to then pipe those things in to do what Bond wants to do with AI generation, and to present those things to the pilot and all the information that he has to do. And Cinco talked about, what do you do with all that data? Absolutely, LVC is the way to do that. So limitations there, if you're going to go out 2v4, like you talked about in the beginning of your question, is obviously 4 airplanes of Red Air. If those are 4th or 5th gen airplanes, you're kind of wasting assets. Or if they're 3rd gen, you still got to pay for them, right? So it kind of, especially if you're in the within visual range, Bond's problem he's trying to solve, that's an expensive problem. And then if you're doing the BVR fight, if those 6 airplanes are still quite expensive, your constructive entities can literally make you money. The other side of that, though, is if you're put a virtual person in that fight, you still have to pay for that simulator. You got to sync the time up, and it's not necessarily very useful. And on the other side of that, you could link just a 4-ship of F-35s to a group of low fidelity simulators in small pockets all across the earth, and do some really, really fantastic training. And it is a great model. So that is what I think of when I think of LVC. And I'll turn it back over to you, because I could talk forever about this.
No, that's good. That's where I was hoping to go. And if anyone wants to amplify, feel free. But another benefit I would offer, as I alluded to earlier, is if we are, for example, northeast of Las Vegas in the Nellis range there, and we have airways going up both sides, well, I can have virtual or constructive contacts that are outside of the airspace, which in real life would be something you need to come back and speak to somebody about, because you might get too close to an airplane full of people. But now we can have those longer ranges that we need for these more advanced threats to do the tactics that we need to do, even if they're not really there. And then that can then translate all the way in to the visual arena, which again is where Bond and that technology really can make its money. Bond, I want to come back to you real quick. You're right. A year ago, right before COVID, I had the benefit of coming up and flying with you gentlemen, and it was amazing. And so it's been fun to watch your journey since. The question I posed to you then, and I realize you've made a lot of leaps and bounds, but is the question I'd like to return to, and that is, when you're doing almost anything that isn't real, and I am not a scientist here, so I'm sure someone else can help me with the terminology, but there's a part of you that knows it's not real, right? Like even these days they have these hamburgers that are not real meat, and I haven't tried one yet, but everybody tells me, oh, they're just as good, but you can still tell. So my question to you is, even with the AI making that J-20 fight against me just right, is there still an element of there's just going to be something that's going to be different on game day compared to when I'm training? I know that's a loaded way to put it, but I guess what I'm really asking you is, how good is it?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I will say that the technology is getting better and better and better every day, right? Because it all comes down to, in terms of the visual representation of these threats, how bright, what's the resolution, what's the fidelity, how do we judge all of the standard stuff we're used to as fighter pilots? So aspect, heading, crossing angle, size, shape, closure, all of those things. Since you last saw the technology, we have basically more than doubled every performance parameter of the tech, and it's getting faster and better and better at a really rapid rate. To the point now where we go out and how real is it? Do you know is there a difference between augmented reality and the real thing? Yes, of course. But is it to the point where the training is extremely compelling and I can start to recognize all of the visual cues I need to make correct BFM decisions? Absolutely, for sure. And let me tell you, when you're flying against an ARJ20 and that thing is thinking and fighting against you, I still sweat just as I would for real. I still experience all of the cognitive loads, and I still make all of the same BFM decisions, or mistakes usually, that I make. And that thing will capitalize. So the value of it is absolutely immense. And to a certain extent, I mean, I encourage you guys to all come along and see this. To a certain extent, once you're in that fight, you forget it's synthetic. I mean, it is transparent to the operator. The ancillary benefit, of course, is it's much safer, right? Because we perceive the world real world around us, but we are flying and fighting against something that doesn't exist. And that speaks in itself to some maybe training value that we haven't necessarily had, whereby, we're in a day-to-day training of BFM, we preserve things like the bubble for obvious reasons to keep us safe. Well, we're not going to do that in combat. We're going to be taking all of that turning room away. And so this offers some interesting opportunities to fly BFM as we would for real, where we're dusting people off and we're not, taking the turning room that necessarily we would give them. So yeah, it's pretty compelling, and it's getting better and better.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that, Jello, if I could interrupt here, because I'm a huge fan of what Red 6 wants to do, and I know TIX2 is we're the BVR engine for both the Air Force and the Navy in the coming years. But what he talked about to me links back to your question to me is, how do the kids these days learn? And Bond's spot on. They are going to take that ability to do a simulated fight and digest all those training lessons that we don't even have in our programs right now, and be able to take it to the real world instantly, way better than probably anybody on this panel could. I'm excited for Bond to bring that technology to the space. So keep pushing, man. You're on the right spot.
Thanks, Odie.
For sure. And so, Gouge, I'd like to come back to you because just a quick anecdote. When I went through Top Gun, I struggled a little bit in the BFM phase, just because there's such an exacting standard for, if you're going to wear the patch, this is what we expect. And so I made it through eventually. And then as a Top Gun instructor under training, the standard was even higher. And it took me 10 flights to get through defensive BFM. And I don't know if they finally gave up or if I finally got it. But either way, what I want to ask you is, as you think about the future of training and AI and machine learning and what Red 6 offers, do you see the opportunity here for us to take someone who's struggling in whether it's augmented or virtual, but to save the resources, right? So in my case, that was 10 flights, 2 aircraft, that's 20 sorties. But maybe if I were to go out there and practice something on my own, or if I practice it in my living room with VR, then I'm more likely to see the cues that I need. And so to your earlier point, it's more efficient, it's more cost effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about the ability to give everyone, for example, a VR headset. Every student gets mailed a VR headset before they even show up to pilot training, to their pilot training base. And then they can begin on the journey of learning all this, basically left loading or moving all of this learning that they have to do of individual specific facts to before they even arrive at pilot training, for example. There's all these really exciting things that we can do with left loading pilot training. But then exactly like you're talking about, if we can individualize pilot training and have an AI sort of track their training journey and identify automatically what they're good and bad at and give them sort of remedial training on specific tasks, specific things that they're having trouble with in the comfort of their own home or on the weekend if they're so motivated, then that's pretty incredible and unlocks a lot of really awesome opportunities, I think. So, yeah, you're exactly right.
And we haven't had a chance really to talk too much about some of the Navy applications of this, but specifically, if the viewers are familiar with what used to be called Magic Carpet, I think it's now called Precision Landing Mode. But some of this technology, more flight control gains, but it's getting to the point where landing on a carrier is becoming simpler. And so they're thinking of removing that from Navy pilot training. It's not required to get your wings, and then you could do it in the fleet for the first time, because the idea being, just like the heads-up display made it simpler from when there wasn't such technology, that with PLM, it becomes safer and cheaper to attain that qualification. Ben, do you have any questions at this point you'd like to add to the panel?
Sure. Secretary Roper is a great friend of the America's Future series. And recently when he announced the flight of the next generation air dominance demonstrator, he referred to a number of different technologies as helping to develop, implement, and acquire new aircraft more rapidly than before. He mentioned a number of things, including Formula One engineering methods. At my school at University of Texas at Austin, we're right down the road from Circuit of the Americas. And this is a great interest to us at our university, because we have mechanical engineering students working on computational fluid dynamics. How do you all see AI, machine learning, and these other emerging technologies helping to acquire, develop, and procure new aircraft faster than before?
I can start, Ben. I think it's a great question, because AI isn't just useful to nudge a pilot or to simulate a J-20 or to finish our sentence, right? AI is also useful in kind of mundane tasks, right? AI is very useful in narrow ways, right? We really have narrow AI is what we're using. And so I think you're going to find AI is going to help with contracting. I think it's going to help with requirements and going through documentation. I think it's going to help identify certain capabilities where there may be a gap, right? And some of this is, if you know AI, like language, right? There's supervised learning and there's unsupervised learning and there's reinforcement learning, but there's an aspect of AI that is kind of it uses unlabeled data in an unsupervised fashion, which means it takes data and it does its own pattern seeking, right? And identifies certain patterns that humans would never even ask the computer to go look for, right? So I think there's aspects of that are going to help us make a tighter loop with regard to our acquisition process. So I think that's one thing that will help us out. I'd also like to jump on real quick on the last topic, artificial intelligence, augmented reality. Like, these are amazing, awesome, bright futures for us. But I am concerned, as probably a lot of people are, like, how do we get from here to there? How do we bridge that gap so that there's no over-reliance? And I do get worried, and Jello, to your point about Magic Carpet, Delta Flight Path, whatever it's called now, like, are we concerned, or should we be concerned that some of our aviators or part of our society is basically not going to be as skilled in certain things because of an over-reliance on the technology before it's mature enough, or an over-reliance on technology that we don't fully understand how it could be spoofed or how it can be tricked. So that's a concern that I think we need to think about and think through as well.
Well, and to that point, just very briefly, when I was a young pilot, we would have to turn off our heads-up displays, not at the ship, but at the field for the occasional practice in case your HUD failed. And so I think as you consider how reliable is it, then you do that less and less. And over the course of my ensuing career, over 705 carrier landings, I've never had a HUD failure. And so I assume they'll look at the reliability, for example, of PLM, and make similar discussions. But before I do that, Ben, we're just about out of time. Do you want me to go around and let anyone say anything else I didn't ask them, or how would you like to wrap up? I want to be mindful of the clock.
Well, Gentlemen, I want to say that it really seems to me like the key message here is that it's not a one size fits all solution. Obviously, AI seems to run through all these different technologies from VR to AR and machine learning. But it seems like the message here really is that augmented reality and what Dan is doing at Red 6 is fantastic, and it has its place. The LVC part of the ecosystem that Collins Aerospace is working on with TIX2 has its place. VR has its place in undergraduate pilot training with US Air Force, and hopefully it's being scaled into other places as well. But really, it's not just about one technology having predominance over the future of aviation training. It's about trying to find as many solutions to help solve these problems as possible, because we can't afford to leave any solution off the table.
And I think if you look back in time, that's the way it's always been as well. I mean, we've had TIX1 and other range debrief skills, like Bond said, it's the debrief that's so important. So there's been different missiles, there's been changes in technology, changes in the way we approach the training, even from a physiological or a psychological point of view. So I would certainly say so, but I'd like to, again, Ben, over to you if you want to let folks go around and say anything last, or how you'd like to wrap up.
Yeah, gentlemen, any last words? We'd love to hear from you.
And if it's any simpler, why don't we go around? So Odie, how about you first?
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. And Ben, it was great to meet you. Appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel and talk to these guys. This is good. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. How about you, Gouge? We'll give you a shot next.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess maybe my parting thought is just with AI, it seems to me that the bumper sticker is just humans with machines, not humans versus machines. And I think that's really what we're all trying to get at here.
Fantastic. Bond, we'll come to you next.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance to chat. I would just like to talk a little bit about culture, and because we've got some fantastically innovative companies here, all doing, taking their respective pieces of the jigsaw. But innovation without a culture that truly embraces innovation will leave value on the table. So I just encourage for all stakeholders that it's very difficult to stop technology, and the sooner we get behind this stuff, the better for everyone involved. But I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. I agree. All right, Cinco.
It has been awesome. Thanks so much. It's great seeing everyone here and being able to talk to folks. And I'm just really excited about what this future looks like. I think we just need to be very thoughtful as we walk into it, somewhat unknown, right? Because this is such an emerging technology. So it's exciting, but let's smartly tackle this future that we have in front of us.
I agree. And so it's been a pleasure for me to moderate this board on behalf of America Future Series. Thank you very much. Ben, back to you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. We very much appreciate it. Best of luck with your future endeavors, and we hopefully will see you here again sometime in the future.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Ben. I look forward to talking to you guys in the future. It was fantastic.